We've all been there. You study a word, you feel like you've learned it, but then 2 days later, it's gone. But researchers in neuroscience have started to build a clearer picture of why some memories fade and others stick, and they've identified a range of factors from how we move our body to when we sleep that have a measurable effect on how well we retain new language. So in this video, we're going to look at 10 evidence-based tips for learning a language more effectively, all drawn from real neuroscience studies. Let's start with gestures. 1. Use gestures to reinforce words. A group of researchers at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig conducted a study where participants either learnt words by pairing them with an iconic gesture, one that resembles the meaning of the word, or instead just an arbitrary control gesture. The words were part of an artificial language, and participants were taught them over 4 sessions. After the training period, the participants had their brain activity measured while doing a word recognition task. The results showed that words learnt with meaningful gestures were not only remembered better, but they actually activated regions of the brain associated with motor activity, especially the premotor cortex. This suggests that the movements weren't just decorative, they actually became part of the memory trace. This links closely to an established language teaching method called total physical response, where students act out the language as they hear it. In both cases, physically involving the body seems to deepen the encoding process. 2. Take a quiet break after studying. This next study focused on what happens after you learn something. Participants in this study were asked to remember a list of word pairs, and then they were randomly assigned to either 10 minutes of quiet rest or a distracted task, such as listening to something or a memory game. Later, they were tested on how well they remembered the word pairs. What the researchers found is that the participants who had a period of quiet rest performed significantly better on the recall test than the participants who had the distracted task. The idea is that consolidation, the process by which memories get stabilized in the brain, benefits from low interference. Even short breaks, if they're quiet and undemanding, give the brain a chance to reinforce what it's just learned. Number 3. Speak the words out loud. This one's called the production effect. In this study, researchers used fMRI to measure brain activity while participants studied words using one of 3 different methods: reading them silently, reading them aloud, or reading them while saying the word check, a sort of sensory motor control condition. After the study phase, participants did a recognition memory test. Words that had been read aloud were remembered significantly better than the other 2 conditions. The fMRI data also showed that words read aloud activated additional brain regions associated with motor activity and auditory perception. The authors argue that this extra processing, saying the word aloud and hearing your own voice, creates a more distinctive memory trace. So a simple tip, say the words out loud. 4. Exercise after learning. This study tested whether a single session of physical exercise could influence memory of newly learned vocabulary. Participants were asked to learn a list of German-Polish word pairs, and then immediately afterwards, they were either asked to exercise at low or high intensity on an exercise bike, or just sit quietly and relaxed. They were tested on the word pairs twice, once 20 minutes later, and again 24 hours later. The interesting thing is, although the high-intensity exercise group didn't perform any better in the short term, 24 hours later they had forgotten significantly fewer words than the rest group. This suggests that intense exercise after learning might help support long-term memory formation, perhaps due to an increase in BDNF, a brain growth factor. Number 5. Follow your curiosity. This study used trivia questions to determine how curiosity affects learning. Participants were shown trivia questions and asked to rate how curious they were to know the answer. And then a few seconds later the answer was shown, but during that gap they were shown an unrelated image of a face that they were told to ignore. Later, the researchers conducted memory tests for both the trivia answers and the incidental face images. The results were striking. Participants remembered not just the answers to the questions they were curious about, but also the faces they were shown during that high curiosity moment. fMRI scans showed that curiosity activated the brain's reward system, especially the dopaminergic midbrain, and this activity was linked to better memory formation in the hippocampus. So the takeaway here is that learning is more effective when you're intrinsically motivated, when you care about the content, and that's part of the philosophy behind my app Squeno. It lets you explore real-world content around the web in your target language and simplifies it down to your level. You get to follow your own interests and the language comes along for the ride. Number 6. Quiz yourself. This study looked at the testing effect, the idea that trying to recall information helps to reinforce it. Participants learnt new information through repeated retrieval, that is, they were tested multiple times during the study period. Then they returned a week later for the final test. Brain imaging showed that items that were retrieved more frequently showed more activity in both the anterior and posterior hippocampus, suggesting a more robust memory trace. The key point here is it's not just about reviewing material, it's about trying to recall it from memory, even if you fail. Just attempting to retrieve a word strengthens its neural representation. This doesn't need to mean flashcards. Every time you pause and think, wait, what does that word mean again? You're engaging in retrieval practice. 7. Linking new words with images. This next study focused on how meaning gets grounded in the brain. Participants were taught nonsense words, things like schruber or fripe, and each one was linked to a familiar object or action. After training, participants listened to the new words while in an fMRI machine. The key result was that hearing a newly learnt word for an object activated areas of the primary visual cortex, suggesting that the brain had formed a direct link between the auditory form of the word and the visual features of its meaning. By the way, Squeno has over 1,000 free stories, and each page has its own illustration, so make sure you check it out to form these deeper associations with new language. The visual context helps the brain reinforce the meaning even if you're not consciously aware of it. Number 8. Space out your study sessions. In this study, researchers looked at what happens in the brain when you repeat study either back to back or spaced out over a period of time. They used EEG to track brain activity and looked for pattern similarity across the different sessions. In spaced learning, participants showed greater spatiotemporal similarity in neural patterns across sessions, meaning the brain was more effectively reinstating the memory trace. They also found that spaced learning led to better long-term recall, and that this neural pattern similarity partially explained that effect. The idea is that spacing forces you to retrieve the memory from scratch, which may help re-encode and strengthen it more effectively. Number 9. Replay vocabulary during sleep. This is one of the most fascinating studies. Participants first learnt Dutch-German word pairs, then while they slept, the researchers unobtrusively played half of the Dutch words during slow-wave sleep, the deep memory consolidation phase. After waking, participants were tested on the translations. The results, words that were replayed during sleep were remembered significantly better, and those words also triggered stronger theta wave activity in EEG recordings, a marker associated with memory retrieval. So yes, under certain conditions, cueing during sleep can enhance language learning. Number 10. Study at bedtime for better recall. Building on that, another study looked at the timing of study sessions. In one experiment, participants learned an artificial grammar like a miniature language, either before bed or earlier in the day. Then, after a delay, their understanding of the grammar was tested. Those who studied before bed performed significantly better. Follow-up EEG data showed that this benefit was linked to slow oscillation spindle coupling during non-REM sleep, a kind of coordinated brain rhythm that seems to help consolidate complex patterns like grammar rules. So even without cueing, just learning right before sleep can improve retention. The material is fresh and sleep helps to lock it in. So there's no single trick to learning a language overnight. But neuroscience is giving us real insight into how the brain encodes, stores and retrieves new language, and how we can work with those processes, not against them. If you'd like to see a full video on any of these studies, let me know in the comments below. And please remember to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon, it all really helps the channel grow. And if you're interested in Squeno, you can get a free 7-day trial of Squeno Premium in the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you check out this one.